just hours after the threat was made public, the Russians immediately started ridiculing Mr. Trump, but they also started bombing Ukrainian cities.
I'm joined today by Michael Bociurkiw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and founder of the Substack newsletter World Briefing. Thank you for speaking to me.
Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Donald Trump's announcement on Ukraine lacked a lot of detail, but he did specify a 50-day grace period for Putin to reach a ceasefire or face 100% secondary sanctions on those buying oil from Russia. Why do you think Trump chose a 50-day grace period for Putin?
That's a very good question. It's a real head scratcher. It goes way beyond the usual 2 weeks that he likes to give people for certain threats. But 50 days, it struck me right away as coinciding pretty nicely with the 60 days that Vladimir Putin of Russia reportedly told Donald Trump that he needed to get the job done in Ukraine, meaning seize control of the remaining bits of the 4 oblasts or provinces that Russia currently holds. Listen, this gives Russia a lot of time to maneuver, to manipulate, to grab more territory, to continue pummeling Ukrainian cities. And by the way, as an indication of how little of a threat this is to Mr. Putin, there were 2 or 3 things there, but one of them was that just hours after the threat was made public, the Russians immediately started ridiculing Mr. Trump, but they also started bombing Ukrainian cities. And in fact, exactly 24 hours ago right now here in Odessa, World Port Odessa, 2 very, very powerful ballistic missiles came in and struck one of the distant ports here. And then there's also been something in the neighborhood of 400 drones overnight in various parts of Ukraine, including more ballistic missiles. So this is not an indication whatsoever that Mr. Putin has changed his attitude or approach or intends to, go easy on Ukraine. In fact, it looks like it's going to be the opposite. A lot of people here are in fear that it will be a worst case scenario that Russia starts using as many as 1,000 drones a day. At the current rate of Russian drone attacks, one media colleague estimated that 50 days gives Mr. Putin the opportunity to launch as many as 25,000 drones onto Ukraine. Finally, part of the statement by Mr. Trump pledged to send more Patriot missile systems to Ukraine. He indicated that would be imminent in a day or 2. Now we're hearing it will take longer. He also said he's getting Europe to pay for this, which raised eyebrows in Brussels. But let's not argue with the master of the art of the deal. And hopefully those Patriot missile batteries will come soon. But let's be clear. These are meant to take down fast, powerful incoming Russian missiles. They're not meant to be used against those swarms of drones. So that's still going to be remaining a big, big problem.
Assuming Putin would take the deal at the end of the 50 days and go all in the next 50 days, how do you think Ukraine will fare in that period of time?
I fear the worst is that he will try to inflict maximum pain on Ukraine. And it's not only the drones and the missiles and the death, the injuries, destruction that they bring. It's also the psychological kind of manipulation too. It does make people here wonder, especially in Kyiv, which gets bombed almost nightly, whether to stay or go. That is one thing. It's not certainly an inducement for business to come and invest into Ukraine. And say we make it to the end of the 50 days, I cannot imagine in my wildest dreams Mr. Putin all of a sudden appearing in, let's say, Istanbul, sitting across from Vladimir Zelensky and saying, let's make a deal that you can pass on to your people and get passed by your own parliament. I don't see that shift coming from the Kremlin.
And so in that case, assuming Trump would then put in place these 100% secondary sanctions, primarily, let's be fair, on China and India from buying oil from Russia, could the US really even bear the weight of doing that, putting these 100% tariffs on China and India?
I think it'll be tricky because we also have to remember that the United States still imports uranium from Russia, which it uses for its nuclear reactors. So there's a bit of a problem there. Just in the past few days, new figures out of the United States saw inflation ticking up a little bit to the point where Mr. Trump is threatening to fire their chairman of the Federal Reserve. So anything that will lead to higher prices, especially at the pump, is very, very sensitive for the Trump administration at this stage of the game. And what also is curious, while this big announcement was being teased, at the same time, 85 co-sponsors of a bill in the U.S. Senate were getting ready to send legislation to Mr. Trump for him to sign that would impose up to 500% tariffs on goods from countries that do deals with Russia. So again, very, very strange that Mr. Trump all of a sudden comes up with this relatively light 100% tariff threat.
So what scope do these tariffs have for prompting China or India to make some sort of pressure onto Russia and Putin?
Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia was recently in, North Korea, in Malaysia for the ASEAN summit, and also in China. And China reaffirmed its support for Russia. It also, the foreign minister of China reportedly said that China cannot see Russia lose this war. So between the two of them, I'm sure they will figure things out. And India is very, very reliant on Russian oil. In fact, they get to pay in their own domestic currency. What a deal is that? So I don't see them bending to this type of tariff pressure. But again, it's going to, Mr. Trump is known for waffling, for blowing hot and cold, for at the last minute retreating on his threats. So I can't imagine we're going to get to that point.
You mentioned it sort of deepened the ties between China and Russia. Could Trump's threats inadvertently push them together to a point where Trump is then in some ways forced to consider the war in Ukraine as part of the threat posed by China?
Well, yeah, in fact, I would go a bit further and zoom out a bit. And I think we're actually seeing week by week this the world actually dividing in three kind of spheres. Putin with Russia and whatever territories he wants to do in this part of the world, the United States, and also China in Asia Pacific. There was recently the BRICS summit in Brazil where, the leaders of Russia and China were not there. However, that bloc is now talking about creating its own headquarters and secretariat. There was also talk from Mr. Putin of Russia of member countries trading more of their own currencies, in other words, trying to threaten the preeminence of the US dollar. So there's a lot happening in different spheres that does not bode very well for the United States in the longer term. And, we also have to remember that in the United States, among Trump's base, Marjorie Taylor Greene, as an example, are really pushing back against Mr. Trump getting the United States deeper into these hot conflicts. So he has that to deal with as well.
Do you think that sort of dissent from within the Republican Party poses, in a way, a serious threat to Trump and might change some of his behaviors, or is it more of an underlying issue?
I think these are brush fires for the time being because Mr. Trump, for whatever reason, still has a lot of sway over the electoral fortunes of members of the Republican Party. We have the midterms coming up in the not too distant future. And I think members of his party will do whatever possible not to get on his bad side. It's a very comfortable position for Mr. Trump right now. Capitol Hill has basically become a staffing arm of the White House. He seems to get his way in the Supreme Court as well. And also judges on lower levels who have tried to upset his attempts to deport alleged criminals or immigrants without proper documentation have been overruled. So it's not a very good time for democracy in the United States. And I should add to that, of course, his attempts to stifle or silent or block the media as well.
So if we take a look at the markets, especially in Russia, they responded to Trump's announcement with happiness, is one way to put it. I think they. Do you think they've made the same assessment that the US markets have, that Trump's policies simply aren't possible without crashing, at very least, the American economy?
Yeah, I think the what was baked into the reaction in the stock market, especially in Russia, was that they know that Trump blows hot and cold, that he changes his mind, but also they feared actually a lot harsher reaction from the United States, from the Trump White House, which didn't come. So, because their big fear was that Trump would okay the provision of the powerful offensive weapons to Ukraine, the HIMARS, the ATACMS, that are more powerful, have more range, and which could take out high value targets like the Kerch Bridge, a Putin pet project, but also a very important artery for the Russian military to ship men and goods to Crimea from where they used to pummel Ukraine. So that was the action there, and then also Russian war bloggers were gleefully ridiculing Mr. Trump, basically calling him a coward and not going any further, and goading on Mr. Putin, saying now is the time to go for it. And that is a fear here in Ukraine, is that the Russians they don't like to be backed into a corner, especially Mr. Putin. And now that he's given an ultimatum, that may trigger him to really go all in into Ukraine, and that doesn't look very good for a day soon, anytime soon, where there would be a victory parade in Kiev.
So, how would you make sense of this weird sort of flipping on the head of how Trump previously has been very critical of Ukraine, and that has had its impacts, but now he's turning to a shifting criticism towards Russia, but yet that seems to now potentially be worse for Ukraine in some assessments?
I dare not try and get into the head of someone like Mr. Trump, but I will say that his language has been more sympathetic towards Ukraine, more supportive. I don't know if the First Lady has been part of that. Perhaps he indicated as much. And I think the animosity that he had towards Mr. Zelensky, at least visibly, is gone. But we also have to remember that this is a man who has a long memory, and he's very vindictive. And I think he still remembers Mr. Zelensky in that quid pro quo scandal from many years ago, where Mr. Trump unsuccessfully tried to basically blackmail him and say, if you don't give me the dirt on Hunter Biden, you're not getting weapons. But at the end of the day, he ended up giving Ukraine offensive weapons. So, and the other day Trump said, this is not my war. Well, it is his war. He was the one who, after Obama went out, he approved the Javelin missiles, which Ukraine badly needed and used to destroy a big part of the Russian Navy. So it's very hard right now for whether it's Kiev or any other European capitals to do policy, to strategize on what to do next when you have a president that changes his mind so often, that makes empty threats. And I'm a Canadian, a patriotic Canadian at that, and we were the best friends America could ever have. And Trump has done everything he can to ruin that relationship. He's forced us, not by choice, he's forced us to look more towards Europe, more towards Asia Pacific for alliances. These are things that will not come back anytime soon in a long time. It's very destructive.
Speaking of empty threats, what do you make of Trump's reported comments to Zelensky, asking him if he could strike Moscow in particular? That sort of escalation seems quite detached even from this current rhetoric.
He did backtrack on that, saying he was just joking or something like that. But I don't think. I think Kiev, they're quite sensible here. They realize that attacking Moscow with U.S. supplied weapons, European supplied weapons would not result in a very good way. It could even provoke, who knows, Mr. Putin, who himself I think is unhinged, to use tactical nuclear weapons. It would probably draw in China a lot more than we need to. So I think that was just idle talk that happened to get released. But in Europe, where they know Russia very, very well, it is very much appreciated and realized that if Mr. Putin isn't stopped, that he will go further. And let's remember that he's not only involved in this kinetic war, there's also a huge hybrid war going on in cyberspace, in the Black Sea, where submarine cables have been cut in the neutralizing of opponents in Spain, United Kingdom, burning down of a warehouse by people who are hired by the Russian security services, burning down a warehouse in London. And then, by the way, tomorrow will be the 11th anniversary of the Russian shoot down of MH17. 298 innocent civilians died in that one of the biggest mass murders in the skies we've seen in our generation. Only 3 men at the middle level of the chain of command have been charged. They're safely on Russian territory. The men who made that order still have not been brought to justice. So, Russia remains a very, very big threat, not only on the ground, in cyberspace, but also in the air, where millions of people travel on a daily basis.
Looking quickly back at the 50-day grace period, Trump has given himself a deadline for action as much as he has for Putin, essentially. If we were to assume that Trump's threats are empty and the weapons deal will sort of just be a continuation of the status quo for Ukraine, what do you see happening after these 50 days?
Well, it's not a very good scenario. The worst case scenario projections are at the moment, if Russia intensifies its summer offensive, and all indications are they will, that the front line could move as much as 60 kilometers. That could displace as many as 250,000 Ukrainians. And those Ukrainians will not only stay in Ukraine, other parts of Ukraine, they will apply to get into other EU countries. That will put massive pressure on these jurisdictions, many of which are having a big problem politically with migration. So the problem we also have at the moment is European countries are still far behind in terms of reviving their military sectors, getting the spending in place to be able to fund weapons for Ukraine. And I think Mr. Putin knows all of this very, very well. He's also banking, I think, on more changes in various countries to political parties or governments that are less favorable to sending weapons to Ukraine. Take all of that, and Mr. Putin is sitting quite pretty. But I do have to put a caveat. The Ukrainians are, as we saw a few weeks ago, when they struck multiple air bases in Russia, very, very innovative, very cunning, very brave. They could still bring a lot of pain to bear in terms of bringing this war to the doorsteps of ordinary Russians. One more quick thing, if I may, and I know I've said this a number of times, but I'll continue saying it, is that there is one lever which Mr. Trump has not yet pulled, which I think he has a lot of leverage, and that is getting allies, countries which enable Russia to evade sanctions, which play host to Russian oligarchs, which allow Russians to buy luxury properties, which allow a lot of Russian tourists in. I'm talking about specifically the UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Thailand, and there are a few others. They know who they are. Mr. Trump could go to them and say, okay, boys and girls, game over. No more red carpet out to the Russians. You have to temporarily stop hosting them, allowing them to buy property, whatever it takes. And that will really, really put pressure on Mr. Putin, I believe, to change approach when it comes to this war. But again, with Mr. Trump, he is gunning for the Nobel Peace Prize. He has threatened his best allies with tariffs. maybe he'll go for it. Maybe he won't. We'll see.
You make a very interesting point because that seems a lot more feasible and easy to accomplish than 100% tariffs on China and India. So do you think why do you think Trump hasn't made that move? Is it simply not flashy enough?
Well, because there's a huge U.S. presence in that part of the world. America is a big purchaser of oil from the Gulf, so it protects a lot of the main waterways. Imagine for a second, even that the U.S. security umbrella would be lifted. As Mr. Trump likes to point out, many countries make a lot of money from hosting U.S. troops there on the ground in the tens of thousands. So, and it isn't as if especially the wealthy Gulf countries can't afford let's say, a temporary absence of Russians from their territories. But it would really send a strong signal back to Moscow, back to across Russia, that this is a very, very serious war that Mr. Putin has got us in. And there is Turkey, also the UAE, also Qatar have played a role to some extent or another in terms of helping Ukraine do prisoner swaps, host peace talks, things like that. So they are vested in the game as well. Turkey, the biggest, they also care very much about Black Sea security.
Assuming we're on day 51 and Putin has not made any action and Trump can't take any action, what happens day 51?
A continuation of what's happening right now. It will go on. It will be another blow to the credibility of the United States, which is also very, very low. I will remind you that USAID, until Mr. Trump launched his arson attack on that agency, Ukraine was the biggest recipient of USAID funds. That is now gone, and civil society here is really, really hurting. Media sector as well. So I think, I was walking around yesterday here in Odessa talking to ordinary civilians, and without exception, they would say all we're hearing from the United States is empty blah, blah, blah. So now is the time, really, I think, for the Ukrainians to be smart about this, to maybe not put as much hope on the Americans and almost tell themselves we're in this on our own. Hopefully, we'll get as much help as we can get from the Europeans, but unless we don't step up to the plate, it's going to be very, very, very difficult.
Do you think Trump may have, in that sense, trapped himself into action, or do you think he could get away with blowing past those 50 days and nobody say anything?
I think he probably trapped himself. And let's not forget, he doesn't have a real national security advisor. He doesn't read intelligence reports. I think he's going on gut feeling, this kind of master of the art of the deal type of thing. I think he's still afraid of Mr. Putin. He clearly thinks that a peaceful Russia, if we ever see that day, will be of huge economic benefit to the United States. It's delusionary. The Russian economy has shrunk to the size, I think it's now equivalent to the size of the Dutch economy. So a lot of, it's too bad there aren't a lot more grown-ups in the room that can talk some sense into him. And as I said earlier, it's really too bad that he didn't wait for that Senate bill to pass, go through Congress and reach his desk. And, if it was used to the max without any presidential waiver, as Senator Lindsey Graham said, that would be the sledgehammer to the Russian economy, and Mr. Putin would be forced to the peace table.